Doll is a character who is very tragic, and that is more of an archetype than a personality description. The story of Murder Drones is one that essentially works without Doll, as you could remove her and it removes only a little bit of conflict, but she doesn't add much to the plot itself other than giving Uzi a reason to think that their shared skull bracelets might be tied to them both having the absolute solver, but she could have simply seen the skull necklace on her mother's photos if they didn't want to include Doll in the story. Instead, Doll's primary purpose in the show is as a sort of shadow of Uzi, a darker version of her that helps explain why Uzi didn't just manage to get her happier ending, but why she actually deserved it. Doll's ending is dark, but it may not be what we think, with there being hints that Doll may simply reconstruct herself after the events of the finale, or even possibly live on inside of Uzi. My name is Deepcut, welcome back to Cartoon Universe. I have a cold today, so sorry if I sound funny, and let's talk about Doll. When Doll was first introduced, she was something of an edgy side character whose importance was unknown. She was the best friend of Lizzie, and together they were a mean girl duo that seemed to rule the school. Lizzie is focused primarily on popularity and control, being practically an extra on the show with no functional purpose, but she allowed for Doll to have a bit of a backstory beyond the more tragic one that we would uncover. Together, they were the most popular girls in school, it would seem, the first choice that Uzi's father would call when he wanted someone to get Uzi out of the house and enjoying the prom, but Doll was living a secret life. Doll lived alone in a unit where she had no real oversight. At some point, she would begin to develop the powers of the absolute solver, and as a result, the desire to drink cooling oil to avoid overheating. When Uzi herself began to develop these powers, it was because they essentially needed to come into play to save her, particularly in episode 3 where it activates to help fight against none other than Doll herself. I imagine then that Doll had her powers activate in a similar way. Doll and Uzi appear to be the same age, and Uzi lost her own mother when she was just a training neural network, one of those tiny drone pods without arms or legs, because they need to take time to learn before actually performing tasks. Doll's parents were presumably also killed when she was in this infant-like state, and while she may have been given arms and legs perhaps even earlier than the other training neural networks, she wasn't given an adult drone to properly train her. I could see her absolute solver activating for simple things to help Doll do her daily maintenance and work without a drone supervising her, activating to help her with things she didn't quite understand or know how to do yet. This would lead to her needing to consume oil to not overheat at a much younger age, and she would use the power she developed to help get her victims to keep her cool, creating a vicious cycle. Doll grew up without the influence of a parent, and Uzi at least had her own father looking after her. Without that kind of positive influence, Doll only knew that she was alone and that she didn't matter to the other drones. While she would become popular through Lizzie, that seemed to be a shallow friendship that was mostly about having some sense of power at school. She didn't use her popularity to have close friends, but rather she targeted her classmates specifically for death. It is because of this that Doll is something of a shadow to Uzi, the darker version of her that Uzi could have been if her life turned out just a little bit different. Uzi, of course, has killed and eaten her classmates as well, but she seemed to come down from this with extreme regret, whereas Doll massacres more of their classmates at the prom just for fun while trying to get to the drones that had killed her parents. It's not something emphasized in the show, but by being abandoned and left to live with the corpses of her own parents, she was taught that drones are expendable to each other, that there was no community or togetherness, and that she was on her own in the world, and really against everyone else if that's what it took to survive. There comes a moment in episode 5 where Doll seems to recognize that she didn't have to become this way, when she sees that Uzi is willing to give up a potential cure in order to help N and V. At this point in the story, Doll had come in to steal the cockroach from Uzi while she was hacking N and V's memories, only to walk away respecting her more than she seemed to respect herself. Doll was willing to kill anyone around her to get what she wanted, but Uzi was willing to sacrifice herself in order to help others, including one person she didn't particularly care for. Doll could have grown from this and essentially joined their team, but she chooses instead to do what she does best, and creates an elaborate trap in episode 6 that could have left Uzi, N, V, and Tessa all dead at the hands of the Sentinels if not for the sacrifice of V. This allowed Doll to escape to the basement, where she'd at least have a head start to find the USB patch file, if not killing Uzi and the gang entirely so she would be safe down there. But unfortunately, this doesn't lead to Doll getting what she wanted. For the actual ending that we received, Doll seems to simply be dead. As I said early on, she isn't exactly necessary for the actual plot, and as a result, her story basically ends in episode 7. At this point, Doll is yo-yoed between trying to murder Uzi and her friends and trying to help them, and then back again, just to make it to the basement of the Copper 9 camp to meet her own demise. She had gone down there to get the USB patch file, finally curing her of the potential control from Sin or her overheating destruction, but Doll just gets killed suddenly when Sin finds her. It was a cool scene, but something a bit unceremonious in a time where death in a TV show is often treated as the end of its own arc. In the end, having no real conclusion to Doll's story is the only conclusion that works for her, a death without even doing something in the end to redeem herself or at last minute help to save the others. She had wanted to help Uzi sometimes, but to do so here would have given some conclusion about people being ultimately good or something to that effect. Instead, what Doll seemingly gets is just the consequence of her own alignments, which was only ever to herself. She gets to die so close to the finish line because she didn't have the constant help of allies built on trust and good intentions. Doll decided intentions simply did not matter, only results, and that resulted in no one being able to trust her, and thus no one being close enough to help her when she actually needed it. Instead, her only real moment in episode 8 is a shot of her clearly destroyed and left behind while everyone else is in class and having fun. This is the most overt ending we have for Doll, and the one I like the most personally, but there are two other outcomes hinted at in this episode as well. The first and most obvious hint that something might still be up with Doll is this shot in the finale credits that show a drone with long hair and red eyes walking around. This drone looks broken, and with the red eyes of Doll, it appears to be her after having been reconstructed in some way. As of now, it looks like her heart was destroyed as Sin knew the risk of letting drones get away and reconstruct themselves using their heart. Because of that, this shot from the credits is something a lot of fans found rather confusing, and it's hard to know what the creators intended with it or if it's even really Doll at the end of the day. If the heart had somehow survived, it could live on like Nori had and reconstruct her body to live like a drone again, but it seems like a weird way to deliver this information after seeing her destroyed body right before the end credits. Instead, I like the theory that other people have proposed in the comments, which is that Doll has somehow jumped into the body of Uzi and is living inside of her, not much different than the Absolute Solver is. The fact that the Absolute Solver can live on inside of Uzi, I would say, is already evidence that Doll could have jumped into Uzi's body as well, and there's actually evidence in the show that shockingly points to this possibility. In episode 7, when Sin is about to kill Doll, we see a shot from Doll's perspective, which includes all of her graphs and information only visible on her screen, including her own name that we can see in the bottom right-hand corner. In episode 8, we get an identical shot, but inside of Uzi's head, this time having N running towards her instead of Sin towards Doll. In this case, Uzi had just eaten the heart of the Absolute Solver, and because of that, she begins to glitch out as her identity merges with the Solver. Following this, she would have the purple and yellow eyes of Uzi and the Solver blended together, and because of that, we'd expect Uzi's own name ID on her screen to turn to that of Sin's. But instead, when it glitches out at the end, there's a moment where it's Doll's name that appears, and in fact, it appears to be the same graphics and layout and language settings that Doll had set up for her own OS as well. This implies that Doll somehow had taken over Uzi's screen for a split second, which kind of makes sense. Sin's process to destroy the heart of another drone seems to be eating it, such as we see her do with N's heart before it manages to get back into his body in episode 8's battle. Uzi had to eat the Solver's heart because simply destroying the heart in a black hole wasn't enough to stop the Absolute Solver's influence. And with that logic in mind, Sin may have known that the only way to really stop a drone like N or even Doll would have been to eat its heart and integrate with the programming in it, the same way Uzi did with the Solver as a whole. That would mean that Doll is somewhere inside of Sin and the Absolute Solver, perhaps much more easily suppressed than the Solver is by Uzi, but when finally merged with Uzi, some part of Doll would also exist in her as well. While the eyes of the new Uzi are a merged purple and yellow, some fans think that in the middle of this, we get a little bit of red representing Doll. To many viewers, this is just the natural effect of yellow and purple blending together here, being red where they come together. But even when Sin retreats into Uzi's tail in the post-credit sequence, you can see a hint of red at the top of her eyes, with the yellow having fully disappeared. To some, this is proof that Doll was absorbed by Sin after she ate Doll's heart, and then Uzi absorbed both Doll and Sin when she ate Sin's heart. But what do you guys think? Let me know your thoughts on Doll as a tragic character and her ultimate fate in the comments down below. Let me know which of these three endings you like the most, whether it's the one where she actually died, the one where she's merged with Uzi, or the one where she's seemingly coming back as her own independent but broken drone. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and I'll see you next time.